Hi, everybody. This is Bill from BCUMC, and this is the Gospel of John study. This is week 10, day 5, Saturday, July 29th, and we are going to continue in John chapter 19. So let's hear the scripture.
Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. These things happened so that the Scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another Scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced.
All right, I'm going to read now from pages 145 through 148 in the Ben Witherington III book about this passage. It says, Understanding the Word. At the cross, according to the synoptics, were none of the 12, and the only women are mentioned. In John, we have Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and the sister of Jesus' mother, and Mary Magdalene, the leader of the female disciples, with the beloved disciple nearby. There is evidence that a person could make a last will and testament on behalf of his loved ones, even from a cross, and it would be valid. In this case, Jesus doesn't distribute his property. The Romans had already confiscated that. But he bequeaths his mother to the beloved disciple, and vice versa. He says nothing to the other two Marys present. What is shocking about this is that Jesus' mother is not entrusted into the care of Jesus' brothers or sisters, but rather into the care of Jesus' most beloved disciple, whom I take to be Lazarus. Now, this makes good sense of the story because we are told the beloved disciple takes Mary into his own home, which would be nearby in Bethany. It also makes sense in light of Acts chapter 1, verse 14, when Mary is still in Jerusalem praying at the time of Pentecost, some 50 days later. Had the beloved disciple been a Galilean disciple, he would have not gone back home to Galilee after seeing Jesus in Jerusalem, see John 21. And this includes the Zebedees, who are finally mentioned in John 21, but only in passing. Furthermore, we learned earlier in John 18 that the other disciple, that is, the beloved disciple, had an all-access pass into the high priest's house, which is unlikely if the beloved disciple was a Galilean like Peter. This may explain as well why he is allowed to be near the cross. He is known to the soldiers who work with the priestly authorities. Jesus' mother is once more addressed as woman in John, as in John 2. And now the beloved disciple is said to be her son, and she his mother. This is Jesus bringing a member of his physical family into the family of faith as the last act of his earthly ministry. Undoubtedly, this is something he deeply wanted to happen. Later, Jesus would appear to his brother James, see 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which presumably explains why the brothers are also present in the upper room praying before Pentecost. See Acts chapter 1 verse 14. Unbelief has given way to belief in the light of the resurrection and appearances of Jesus, even to James. At verse 28, Jesus quotes Psalm 22:18, indicating another fulfillment of Scripture from that psalm. On the surface, there would appear to be contradiction between the synoptics and the Johannine portrayals here, but there is not. What Jesus is offered in John is wine vinegar on a sponge, the Gatorade of their day. In the synoptics, Jesus is offered sour wine as a narcotic that would dull the pain a little bit, but actually prolong the agony. This Jesus refuses, as he doesn't want to prolong the agony. After all, atonement is not about the amount of suffering, it's about the death of the Lamb. After drinking this, Jesus declares all has been fulfilled and finished, and he bows his head and dies. We are spared any gruesome descriptions of the final agonies. Jesus is depicted as dying with dignity and in control to the end. Originally, the Jewish officials had wanted to wait until after the Passover to deal with Jesus and the others, presumably not wanting to spoil the Passover celebrations, but it was not to be. So now, as the sun has already begun to sink, Jesus died at the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m. There was need to get the execution process over quickly and the bodies off the cross. There is, therefore, the request to have the legs of the victims broken so they could not hold their chest cavities up any longer. This would quickly die of asphyxiation. In the case of Jesus, however, this proved unnecessary, as Jesus already died, and to make sure of it, a soldier pierced him in the chest cavity with a spear, water and blood flowing forth from one side. In later Christian exegesis, this was seen as an embolic or symbolic of the sacraments, both baptism and the Lord's Supper. But here it is simply an indication that Jesus was truly, fully mortal and truly died. At verse 35, we have an important statement. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe. This should be compared to the purpose statement in John chapter 20, verse 31. Notice the present tense here. When we get to John 21, however, the beloved disciple is spoken of in the past tense. And here we hear the community say, we know his testimony is true. In both cases, the reference is to the beloved disciple. And here we have a clue to this gospel. The gospel is chiefly the memoirs of the beloved disciple, which is according to John 21, he actually wrote down. This means he was a literate man, among other things. When he wrote down his testimony, he was still alive, hence the statement here in verse 35. The final editor, whom I take to be John of Patmos, acting on behalf of the community after the beloved disciple's death, edited the material, arranged things, added editorial comments required for an audience in Ephesus, and so on. Thankfully, we have this gospel. It is an eyewitness testimony, later edited by a writer of another New Testament book, Revelation. And since he was finally responsible for its gospel form, it was attributed to John. But it was not John's personal testimony. We may ask finally, why the stress on eyewitness testimony at this juncture? The answer, in part, is surely to reassure that Jesus was indeed genuinely human and truly died, not merely swooned. And so atonement was truly accomplished, finished. There are two further final fulfillments of Scripture seen in all this. Not one of those is the bones to be broken, which seems to be a combination citation of Psalm 34, verse 20, Exodus chapter 12, verse 46, and Numbers chapter 9, verse 12. And they will look on the one they had pierced, which is a reference to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. Again, it was critical to demonstrate that almost everything that happened on the last day of Jesus' life happened according to Scriptures, precisely because no one was looking for a crucifixion.